I'm going to share with you a story called Old Glory by Bruce Coville. I like this story because it's written in the form of an essay that a kid writes to his teacher and gives in as a homework assignment. So it's a little bit different than reading just a regular story. The kid's assignment is to write an essay called The Day I Did My Duty. So this is Donald Henderson's essay. He's the speaker. And it's about his great grandfather, who he calls Granda, and whose real name is Arthur. So let's see what it's like in the future. Old Glory by Bruce Coville. Donald B. Henderson, Civic Responsibility Class. Ms. Barnum, September 15th, 2041. Essay, The Day I Did My Duty. My great-grandfather was the craziest man I ever met. Sometimes it was embarrassing even to have him be part of the family. For example, you should have seen how he acted when Congress passed the SOS law last June. He actually turned off the holo set. Well, that's the end of life as we know it, he said as the image started to fade. Then he stared at the floor and started to mutter. Oh, Arthur, don't be ridiculous, said my mother. She switched the set back on and waited for the news geek to reappear in the center of the room. Ridiculous, yelped Grandad. You want to see ridiculous? I'll show you ridiculous. He stood and he pointed to the big flag that hangs over the holo set. That's ridiculous. 13 stripes, 62 stars, and not a bit of meaning. After what they did today, it's all gone. Well, here's what we know. I don't know what a holo set is, although I'm thinking it might be like a hologram or something that appears in the middle of a room to give news. We know that there are 62 stars, so maybe there's 62 states in the future. And I don't know what this SOS law is, but Grandad seems really annoyed about it, and he thinks it has something to do with losing his liberty, because that's what our flag stands for. So let's see. That was a relief. After Grandad came to live with us, I was always afraid he was going to get us into trouble. So I felt better whenever Dad made him be quiet. Sometimes I wish Dad would just throw him out. I didn't really want him sleeping on the streets like all the old men I walked past on the way to school, but I didn't want to make our uncle angry either. I don't know what the uncle is. It's a capital U. Maybe it's part of the government. Let's see. Later that night, when I was going to bed, Grandad called me into his room. How are you doing? He asked. I shrugged. I'm okay. Grandad smiled. Are you afraid of me? I wanted to say no, only that would have been a lie, so I just nodded my head. Afraid I'll talk dangerous? I nodded again. I didn't know what I would do if any of my friends were ever around when he started talking like he does sometimes. I knew what I should do, of course, but I didn't know if I could do it. I mean, he was my great-grandfather, even if he was crazy and wicked. He looked sad. Are all the kids at your school like you? He asked. What do you mean? Scared little sheep, afraid to talk. I'm not afraid to talk, I said loudly. I just don't talk nonsense like... I broke off. Like me? He asked, scratching at the little fringe of white hair that circled his head. I don't know why. He never got his head fixed. All the other great-grandfathers I know have full heads of hair, whatever color they want. Not mine. Seems like you can get hair plastic surgery in the future. I looked away from him. Suddenly, I realized what was wrong with his room. Where's your flag? I asked. I took it down. I must have looked pretty funny. At least the look on my face made him snort. How could you? I asked in a whisper. It was easy, he said. I just pulled out the tabs at the corner and then... Grandad! Donald, he replied. When the government passes SOS, they took away the last thing that the flag stood for. I don't want to look at it anymore. He paused and stared at the floor for a while. I looked at the door, wondering if he would say anything if I just left. Suddenly he looked up again. "Listen, Donald, I'm 90 years old. That's not that old these days. I could probably last another 30. That was no news. It was one of the reasons my mother was so upset when he moved in. I felt sorry for her. 30 years of Grandad was my idea of a real nightmare. "The thing is," he continued, "I'm just a normal guy, not a hero. But sometimes there's something that you have to do no matter what it costs you." I looked at him in horror. "You're not going to do anything crazy, are you?" I felt sick in my stomach. Didn't he understand he could get us all in trouble? If he wasn't careful, the uncles might come and take us all away. I glanced at the ceiling, half expecting it to open up so that a giant hand could reach down and snatch my great-grandfather then and there. So the uncles seem like they're somebody who's in charge, and they're probably like a police of some kind. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked at last. "Maybe I'm hoping that if I scare you enough, it will make you start to think," he shrugged. "Or maybe I just want to see what you'll do." "Can I go now?" "Yeah," he said bitterly. "Go on, get out of here." I slipped out of his room and ran down the hall to my own room. I flopped onto my bed and lay there, staring up at my beautiful flag and trembling. I thought about Grandad all that night. I thought about him in the morning in school the next morning, while we were saying the pledge and the Lord's Prayer and reciting the names of the presidents. I remember what Grandad had said the first time he heard me recite the list, that there had been more presidents than we were naming, that some of them were being left out. I wanted to talk to my teacher, but I was afraid. The next morning was Saturday. When Grandad came to breakfast, he had a red band tied around his arm. He was wearing a vest with fringe on it, a blue shirt, and faded blue pants. He was carrying a lumpy plastic bag. He had a button on his vest that looked like an upside-down Y with an extra stick coming out of it. Peace sign, right, guys? What's that?" I asked, pointing to the button. "A peace symbol," he said. He dropped the bag on the floor and settled into his chair. "Really, Arthur?" said my mother. "Don't you think this is carrying things a little too far?" "SOS was carrying things too far," said Grandad. My father sighed. "Look, Grandpa, it's not really a problem. If you don't break the rules, SOS won't have any effect on you." I was amazed to hear him say that. Then I decided he must be trying to get Grandad to calm down. It didn't work. Grandad shook his head stubbornly, and suddenly I knew what he had in the bag. My throat was thick with fear. I couldn't finish my breakfast. After breakfast, I followed Grandad out of the house. He was heading for the town square. I was pretty sure I knew what he was planning. My stomach was churning. What if the uncles thought he had polluted our whole family? I could only think of one way to save us. I slipped into a televid booth to call my uncle. When I told him what was happening, he looked stern and shocked. So this must be like a FaceTime booth of some kind. "You won't hold this against the rest of us, will you?" I asked nervously. He shook his head. "Of course not," he said. "You've done the right thing. We'll have to come and talk to all of you when this is over, of course, but I wouldn't worry about it much." The screen went blank. I hurried back out to the street. I felt embarrassed and frightened, but I was also a little excited. Would the SOS men really show up? My friends would think I was a real hero. I hurried toward the town square. Grandad was already there. He had climbed onto the bandstand of all places, and he was shouting about the SOS. People looked at him nervously. To my surprise, A few actually stopped to listen. I stood beneath a large tree about 100 feet away. I didn't want to get too close. Suddenly, Grandad reached into the bag and pulled out the flag that he had taken off his wall the night before. Holding the upper edge, he rolled it over the side of the bandstand. A slight breeze made the stripes slide and shift. I covered my face with my hand and wished the terrible scene would end. Where were the SOS men? Friends, cried Grandad. When I was a boy, this piece of cloth used to stand for something. Yes, it did. In fact, it stood for a whole lot of things. Ideas. Like that a man should be free to say what he thinks and worship where he wants and get together with other folks when it pleases him. More people were stopping to listen now. Someone started to boo. But that's all over, shouted Grandad. Bit by bit, piece by piece, we've given away all the things this used to stand for. SOS was the end of it. Now this poor old flag doesn't stand for anything at all. That being so, I think it's time to put it out of its misery. I looked around. Where were the SOS men? Why didn't they get here? Now that people realized what Grandad was going to do, they started to back away. Some of them left. I could tell that others wanted to get as far away from the terrible thing he was about to do as they possibly could. But they couldn't bring themselves to go. They wanted to see if he would really do it. Grandad raised the flag and lit a match. Goodbye, Old Glory, he said sadly. It was a good idea while it lasted. He touched the corner of the flag with the match. Nothing happened, of course, since like all flags, it was made of flame-proof material. You couldn't burn a flag even if you tried. Grandad knew that. He wasn't stupid, just crazy. A crazy, dangerous person. The kind who could ruin the wonderful country we've built. Suddenly, I saw the SOS men. They looked beautiful in their blue pants, white shirts, and red vests. Grandad saw them too. I know he did. So it's not like it's my fault, really. He had a chance. Everyone knows that even though the new law allows for instant executions, the shoot-on-sight men were supposed to give a guy a chance. But Grandad didn't care. When his first match went out, he lit another one. He held it to the corner of the fireproof flag and just stood there, smiling at the three men, so everyone could see that he was crazy. The men lifted their laser rifles. The leader counted to 3 and they fired in unison. The light sliced right through the old man. He toppled over the edge of the bandstand. The flag curled around him as he fell. He was still holding it when he hit the ground. My throat got thick. I could feel the tears at the corner of my eyes. Crazy, I know. But he was my great-grandfather after all, so I don't think it was too bad to feel a little sad about what had happened. That doesn't mean I don't know I did the right thing by calling the SOS guys. I mean, think about it. What would happen if other people started to believe like Grandad? Crazy things like everybody should be allowed to say whatever they want to. What kind of world would that be? The end. So now we know the SOS law means that they can shoot on sight. Instant executions. No trials, no lawyers. If they think you're guilty, you're gone.